we're in the midst of a culture war. It's a war between ideas, a war between worldviews, a war between ways of understanding ourselves, our bodies, our love lives, our sex lives, and our relationships and our marriages. And it would appear, from the media at least, that Christians are losing that war because our views on these issues are treated more and more as outdated, as irrelevant, as narrow-minded, as just plain wrong. And at the heart, this war is a clash between the idea that anything goes because we can decide between right and wrong ourselves, and no one should say what I do in my personal life, and it's just me making my decisions. We're individuals, and the idea that what God says is best, he gets to decide what's right and wrong, and that's the clash. That's the battle. And we know instinctively which one sounds more attractive, don't we? Which one feels better. But there's the war. We're told that Christians are living in the past, that we're losers who are living back in the 1950s. And they picked the 1950s because, well, the 1960s happened. Many of you weren't around for that. There are a few who maybe were born just about then, maybe. Well, late 60s, there you go. No, I was 1973. I'm a product of the 60s. Things that were happening there. But the 1960s are famous as the sexual revolution. That's what they're called. They saw the beginning of a massive rejection of the Christian way of life and a particular way of thinking. Now, actually, they weren't the beginning because that had started 150 years before, but it was really ramped up, and it was just evident in all these kind of areas. And the 60s became about free love, about free expression, a whole new way of thinking about our bodies, our sexuality, our families. And since then, our views of sex before marriage have systematically been challenged and changed. Our views on homosexuality as a community have completely reversed. We've seen the acceptance of divorce as a normal reality. Before the 1960s, it was really hard to get divorced, and it was really expensive, and so almost no one did it. And then since then, everyone does it. 50% of marriages in this country end in divorce. 35% of first marriages, 65% of second marriages, 95% of third marriages. Right? It doesn't get better, it gets worse as you go down the thing. It just gets easier and easier to leave. Abortion on demand is now a thing. The lowering of the age of consent. A whole new way of thinking about adultery and about pornography and about prostitution. The third wave feminists of the last few years have been arguing vehemently that prostitution is a really good thing for women. Because if you've got it, you may as well use it, celebrate it, make money out of it. And the older feminists are horrified by it because they're thinking, no, that was the abuse that we were kind of fighting against. And so everything's turning on its head. We're still horrified by some things as a society, right? You mention pedophilia and people are horrified. But even then, our powers of reason have been changed, so we can't even explain as a community why we feel that some things are right and wrong and what things fit into it. We've got this sick, angry feeling, whatever it is. But marriage, it's an afterthought these days. I mean, do it if you want to have a big party and stuff, but who cares otherwise? The idea of faithfulness, of being committed, is disappearing. I mean, Bruno Mars, let's get married. It's a really dumb thing to do. And if you wake up in the morning thinking, just break up. Right? That's what the song we heard at the start. Sex itself was for those who were committed to each other in marriage. And then it became for those who were committed to living together for a while. And then it was for those who were committed to going out with each other for a while. And now one-night stands are almost expected if you go internet dating, right? And some people are horrified that they didn't know when I signed up for this internet date that I'm going on that that's what was going to happen at the end of the night. And so there's all sorts of, horrible things happening in our community. Sex and casual sex with acquaintances and colleagues with no commitments normalised. It's just friends with benefits. I saw a survey a couple of years ago that 25% of city workers in Sydney claim, at least, that they have had sex with someone from their workplace in their workplace when the boss wasn't watching. That's a lot of, well, unless maybe it was with the boss. That's bizarre. You think, how could that be? How do they get away with it? Primetime TV is full of sex and nudity and swearing. ABC kids shows now, if you watch anything in the afternoon, for even 12, 10-year-olds, there's alternate normalising of different forms of sexuality as just part of the show. And sex, well, we've known this for years, is used to sell stuff, right? It's in all the ads. It's used to sell soft drink, it's used to sell lawnmowers, and even used to sell toenail clippers. The motto of the day is, if it feels good, do it. Actually, that's a bit too complicated for today's world. It's now, just do it. And you know what? All the evidence points to this sexual revolution, which is what it's called since the 1960s, being an unmitigated failure. If you tried to do a scientific study of a community and said, well, let's work out what's right and wrong and what works and so on, what would you, if you could do that today, what would you discover? Well, we've got more relationship breakdown than ever. We've got more young women who are sex slaves. We've got more diseases, more abuse, more domestic violence. People are more unhappy. They're lost and confused. As I said, around half the marriages in this country end in divorce. And there are terrible consequences when there's divorce, right? Unintended consequences, financial consequences. I mean, there are only two people that get rich out of divorce. Who are they? Lawyers and real estate agents. They make a mozza. They want it to happen because it's big bucks for them. You double your expenses in life. All sorts of things happen. Physically, there are terrible consequences. Socially, because you're moving out of your community because you've got to be away from them, or there's AVOs, and so whose friends are whose, and and so you lose your friends and connections and the stuff that's happening in your work where you went shopping. That all changes. And the consequences, not just on the people involved, but on the following generations, and in fact on the broader community, there are consequences for it. Children born outside of marriage are 5 times more likely to be poor and 9 times more likely to drop out of school. 85% of youth with severe behavioural issues have no father in the home. That's a big percentage. 75%, where are we? 75% of youth with drug and alcohol problems have no father in the home, and 85% of youth in prison have no father in the home. But we don't even have to look at the statistics to know that the revolution doesn't work. We know it in our lives. The pain, we know it in our friends' lives and in our neighbours' lives. And yet what's so puzzling for our contemporaries is why this new way just doesn't work. Why is it if I do what feels good or just do it, that I end up unhappy and bring terrible disaster on my love life, my sex life, and on my marriage? And I want to say that from the outset that what's on offer in the Bible is a rejection of the ways of the world, right? There's no bones about two ways about it. And it's a call to accept the new ways of our Creator through the gospel of forgiveness and new birth. God holds out a way of relating that makes sense, a way of being in family, a way of being in marriage, a way of having sex that's compelling, that brings healing, and that actually produces the kind of results that everyone wants. Longer lasting, more satisfying, more enjoyable and profitable relationships. But there's a catch. you can't actually have it without coming to grips with the lordship of Jesus Christ. And that's a problem for our contemporaries, because fundamentally the revolution has all been about rejecting God's lordship. We've walked away from God, who is himself love, the God who invented relationships, the God that created marriage, the God who came up with sex. Society wants to get rid of God and yet somehow maintain these beautiful things that he's given us, but use them for different purposes. We've reinvented everything without him. We've reinvented love even without reference to God. And what we ended up with, instead of real love, is an insipid, pathetic shadow of the real thing. It's a ghost. It's a phantom. Now, you think about how people use the word love. I love Coke. I love Macca's. I love chocolate. I love that show, which I've just seen. What does that mean? Well, I'm excited by it. It fired off some dopamine responses in my head, like my taste buds were tingling. I'm in love. They talk about falling in love, and they talk about falling out of love, as if it's just a hormonal thing that happens in weird cycles. They talk about making love, when it's not making love, it's having sex. That's what it is. Use the right term for the right thing. But here's the thing. The Bible says that the secret to marriage and the secret to sex, the secret to all relationships really is love. Hollywood and the radio are right about that love is the answer. But we've got no idea what love is because we've got rid of God. We sing about it, we write about it, we search for it, but we can't find it or pin it down because we've lost the source. In fact, you listen to all those songs on the radio, and they're all about love, aren't they? There's even lots about sex, and there's hardly any about marriage. There's only two I can think of. One, you half of the room won't even know it. Love and marriage, go together. Who's heard that? Yeah, see, you've got to have been, at least in... Yeah, that's an old one. And the only other song I could think of was Bruno Mars, who says getting married is a really dumb thing to do. Let's do it because we're drunk. And we'll break up in the morning. It doesn't matter. Who cares? And I don't care if you leave. And that's the state of marriage. Well, today we're going to do the groundwork and see the broad principles that God sets down for love, for sex and marriage. We're not going into lots of details today. We're going to be doing that over the term, looking at individual topics. Today we're just putting down a foundation to build on. God's design for relationship, God's plan for love, sex and marriage. And in the coming weeks, we'll fill in all the gaps and we'll take a look at specific things. You may have questions that we might address. We're going to have Roast the Rector at the end of term, so you can just go for it. But the specific kinds of things we'll look at over the next few weeks are sex and what does the Bible say about that? Does it have an opinion on it? And how to have it, when to have it, how often, with who? Why do things go wrong? What are God's keys to marriage? We're going to deal with issues like singleness, divorce, widowhood, LGBTQI issues, and more. But tonight we're just starting with the big picture and laying the foundation.